Second.
Ms. Adams makes the motion. Mr. Clark, I believe, Mr. Robert Clark made the second. Any discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
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 Mayor Horn.
Gotta do the.
Oh, that's
We
right.
have
We
to do
got
the
to do
roll
it again,
call to
don't we?
even start the meeting.
Okay. Kelly, would you like to call the roll?
Yes, sir. Mr. Robert Clark,
Aye.
Ms. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Brennan,
Yes.
Mr. Rocket,
Yes.
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
Mr. Apple,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Marion, Mr. Marion, Mr. Hutchins,
Yes.
Mr. Todd, Mr. Perkins,
Yes.
Mr. Clark,
Yes.
and Mr. Bessie.
Yes. Did you hear that?
Very good.
Yes, I did.
Okay, very good.
I roll call. That motion passes unanimously. Members, as I always do, I need to remind us of our ethics awareness. And that is if any of you have any potential conflict of interest or your family members have any potential conflict of interest on items coming before us today, please indicate now so we may ask you to fill out the appropriate item to be excused from that particular vote. Anybody have a potential conflict of interest? Very good. Moving on. We're into the public comment section of our meeting. And Kelly, I believe we do have some folks signed up to give comments.
Yes, Chairman Horn. At this time, I would like to recognize Ms. Kara Cody, who signed up for public comment. There are several others that are on the call that I do not recognize, but she's the only one at this point that has indicated that she would like to speak.
Very good. Ms. Cody, welcome. Please state your name and your address.
Hello, my name is Kara Cody. I am the Executive Director of the Workshop of Davidson in Lexington. Our address is 275 Monroe Road, Lexington, North Carolina. We fall under the Winston-Salem MPO jurisdiction as part of our Midway transportation route. I've come today to just say that we appreciate that you all have allowed us to once again apply for 5310 grant funding for our door-to-door transportation route. The Workshop of Davidson has been serving people in Davidson County since 1964. So we are in our 60th year of operation. We serve adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And I apologize, I'm at home. So if you hear my birds in the background, I do apologize. But we serve adults with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And transportation is one of the most important parts of what we do because they are not able to drive and get themselves back and forth to our program or other community services. We have, like I said, applied for 5310 grant funding. What we do is we are a vocational and life skills training program. So we teach, we do personal care services for those that need help with eating and toileting and ambulation back and forth to whatever our activities are. We do community activities, sports, any kind of recreational activity you can think of. But we also have a vocational training element and we do job skills and work on small parts assembly so that we can teach them work skills. And then we have job coaching programs that reach into the community to once the person has met their capacity to work in the community, we take them out and work towards getting them gainfully employed. And we also have residential programs as well. So what we do serves a very marginalized population in the community, but a very important and loved population as well. So the funding that the Winston-Salem MPO is able to assist us with is very, very valuable to our services. we realize that we are a small program and that we don't have as many riders as some of the larger transportation providers. But again, we have a very small community that is under Winston-Salem MPO. So that's why our numbers are not bigger for our entire program. The rest of our program is under the NCDOT, which is the rural routes in Davidson County. So our midway route is, not a big route, but it's a very important route. And we just wanted to say hello and thank you all for the past funding that we've received. And we have just put in this, the application for fiscal year 23 and 24. And we hope and pray that you guys can look favorably on our program. We do a lot of good work for the individuals we serve. Like I said, we are in our 60th year of service to our community. And without our transportation funding, a lot of our people would not be able to get back and forth and be active in our programs. So I thank you for your time and consideration today as you review our upcoming funding applications. Thank you so much.
Ms. Cody, for being with us today. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
Very good. Do we have anybody else wishing to speak? You can flash on your hand or your face or just speak out. I'm seeing nothing and hearing nothing, so that will conclude the public comment section of our meeting. Thank you very much for those in attendance, and we appreciate your comments, of course. Our first action item is consideration of our minute meetings from our May meeting. You had a chance to review those members, and if there are no changes or additions, we'll entertain a motion to approve.
Motion to approve. Second. Mike Brennan.
Let's see, I believe that was, who made the motion? I'm sorry.
Mayor Todd.
Oh, Mayor Todd made the motion in the second.
Mike Brennan.
Okay, very good. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Gail, if you please call the roll. Thank you.
Mr. Robert Clark, Mr. Robert Clark,
I was muted. Yes.
We
Ms.
know.
Adams,
Yes, we know.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Bessie,
Yes.
Mr. Brannon. I think
I
you
made-
voted yes.
I made the second, yes.
Mr. Rocket,
Yes.
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
Mr. Apple,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Marion, Mr. Hutchins,
Yes.
Mr. Todd made the motion, Mr. Perkins,
Yes.
and Mr. Willie Clark.
Yes.
That concludes it.
Members, that is,
also a yes.
Apologies.
I said Rick Morris is also a yes.
okay, Rick,
Thank you,
welcome.
sir.
We didn't see you there. Thank you.
I couldn't get in very
Very good.
easily.
Members, that passes unanimously. Item number 3 on our agenda. And John, I believe you have the briefing on this one.
I do. Good afternoon, Chairman Horn and TAC members. Action item 3 begins on page 21 and is the amendments and modifications for the Winston-Salem Urban Area MPOs FY24 through 2033 MTIP. There are a total of 10 projects included in the item in handout. This was presented as an information item at the May TAC meeting and was subject to a 30-day public review period between June 10th and July 11th. I'll entertain any questions.
Question for John. We'll entertain a motion, please.
Move for approval, Adams.
Second, Clark.
Sanders makes the motion. Mr. Robert Clark makes the second. Any discussion? Kelly, if you'll buzz through the roll.
Mr. Clark voted yes. Ms. Adams voted yes. Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Bessie,
Yes.
Mr. Brandon,
Yes.
Mr. Rocket,
Yes.
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
Mr. Apple,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Morris, yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins,
Yes.
Mr. Todd,
Yes.
Mr. Morris,
Yes,
Mr. Perkins,
yes.
and Mr. Whitty Clark.
Yes.
I'm no answer from it, but that's a yes from Perkins.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you, members. That is unanimous. Item number 4, Kelly, I believe you have the briefing on it.
I do. Good afternoon, Mayor Horn and members of the TAC. The item before you is the approval of the apportionment of FTA Section 53 funding. That's for seniors with disability, and that enhances mobility for seniors and individuals with disability, as well as our 5307 grant program that is for our job access reverse commute, and that's for fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24. The Winston-Salem urban area does receive federal transportation funding to assist eligible subrecipients with transportation meeting transportation needs for disabled and elderly populations in the urban area. And again, like I said, that's under our 5310 umbrella for Federal Transit Administration, as well as funding to assist with job access reverse commute. For this call for project, we combined fiscal year 23 and fiscal year 24 in order to catch us up with the funding that was made available to subrecipients. The amount in total for our 5310 was a little over $1.1 million, and for JARC is 110 because per our program management plan and our agreement that the MPO approved, we allocate 55,000 of our 5307 funding every fiscal year. As part of this process, we did a call for projects for which we received 6 applications for 5310 and 2 for JARC. And then those applicants were evaluated by an external subcommittee in Greensboro, and the projects were scored based on that evaluation, and the funding allocated again based on that evaluation. Everybody that applied received some amount of dollars. They may not have received the full amount, and that was based on how well they scored and how well they described the project and what impact it would have to the community. Attached in your packet are the results of at least the funding allocation proposed by MPO staff. What we're acting upon is really item 4A and 4B. Item 4A being for 5310, enhanced mobility for seniors and individuals with disability, and item 4B being for job access reverse commute under our 5307 grant funding. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Kelly, any
Yes, ma'am.
questions for Kelly?
Yes,
Ms. Adams, yes, ma'am.
thank you. Hi, Kelly.
Yes, ma'am.
I always thank you. I'm sure all of us thank all of the staff for putting all the information together for every project or report. But I'm still missing when it comes to, what we do. I need to see some participation numbers. If you can show us when you guys give us information of these transport services, and we know they're all needed, we need more, but we need to understand how many people are we moving. Whatever the metrics are that you all are using, whether it's to jobs, whatever, medical, whatever, we just need to see a number. And even if you could give us 22, 23, I'd take that too. And maybe I'm the only one, but I'm sure these council members and mayors would like to see, and commissioners would like to see something in the CARF when we present this type of information.
Yes, ma'am. I'd be sure to share that with the committee.
Thank you.
We can send that in a follow-up email as well.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Good. Thank you, Ms. Adams. That's some important information. Thank you. All righty.
Move for approval,
Um,
Mr. Chair.
Thank you. I'm sorry, the second was? That broke up on me. Second was again, please.
Mayor Todd.
Kelly, did you get that?
Yes, sir. Mayor Allen Todd.
Very good. Thank you very much, Mr. Todd. I must have beans in my ears or apples in my ears or something. All righty. We have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Hey, Kelly, if you do the roll, please.
Mr. Robert Clark,
Yes.
Ms. Adams made the motion. Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Bessie,
Yes.
Mr. Brannon,
Yes.
Mr. Rocket,
Yes.
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
Mr. Apple,
Yes.
Mr. Horn. Mayor Mike Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Marion, still, I don't think he's back on the call. Mr. Hutchins,
Yes.
Mr. Todd Woody, yes. Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Mr. Perkins,
Yes.
and Mr. Willie Clark.
Yes.
That concludes it.
Of course, that passes unanimously. Our next item on the agenda is going to be a co-presentation between Hunter and Pat. But just as a prelude to it, members, I thank you over the last couple of months. I believe we introduced this at our May meeting. Is that right, Kelly? And so the staff has been working hard in developing the guidelines for the Regional Flexible Funding Program. A lot of work went into this. A lot of your TCC members' input went into this as well. This is probably maybe in my short time on the TAC, this is probably one of the most substantial actions that we'll consider. It's going to reshape and make far more efficient, in my opinion, our prioritization and our funding process. So with that, Hunter, I will turn it over to you to start.
Thank you, Mayor Horn. Good afternoon, members of the Transportation Advisory Committee. Just one quick moment. Mr. Ivy will be joining me on item number 6 when we talk about prioritization. So I'll invite him on that one. But for item number 5, we will have an informational presentation. As I stated earlier, the item before you is the consideration of the Regional Flexible Funding Program and policy for the Winston-Salem Urban Area MPO and the establishment of a Regional Flexible Funding Subcommittee. This item establishes a new way of doing business when it comes to programming funds under our direct attributable funding programs. You will know them as the Congestion Mitigation and Air Quality, or CMAQ, Carbon Reduction Program, Surface Transportation Block Grant, and Transportation Alternatives Programs. This new policy establishes a call for projects that programs funds out for 5 years and seeks to respond to project delivery challenges through a mix of incentives, tools, and restrictions. To ensure that this policy is carried out properly, this item establishes an RFF subcommittee, which shall be made up of Amy Flight from the Village of Clemens, Chris Jensen from the town of Kernersville, Scott Snow from the town of Walkertown, Jeff Fansler from the city of Winston-Salem, and Jeff Turner from NCDOT Division 9. The first meeting of the RFF subcommittee will be a public meeting held virtually on September 10th, 2024, with further information to be posted on our website. Prior to the adoption of this item, however, I have a few informational slides. These are a lot more brief than the presentation that we gave in May. And after the presentation, we'll be happy to answer any questions. So Mayor Horn, with your permission, I would like to share my screen and begin the presentation.
You sure you don't want Mr. Ivy to help you on this one?
He will be a tremendous help on number 6. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, can everybody see screen number 2 with regional flexible funding on it?
Yes.
Excellent, thank you. So we'll dive in. This is how we will allocate our direct attributable funds that we receive as the MPO going forward. And we're giving it a brand new name, Regional Flexible Funding, because it describes exactly what those funding sources are to us. They're relatively flexible funding sources, and they can be applied towards regional projects throughout our MPO. It is in response to a lot of feedback that we've received both from the Transportation Advisory Committee and your staff on the Technical Coordinating Committee. The first thing that we heard from the group was that we need to give municipalities the tools to develop realistic cost estimates and schedules. And so one thing that the Regional Flexible Funding Policy puts into effect is a requirement that a municipality submitting an application must submit a cost estimate prepared by a professional engineer. If preparing a professional engineer estimate is seen as maybe cost prohibitive for some of our smaller municipalities, we have a backup option, which is that the applicant must attend an application pre-submittal meeting in which NCDOT Division 9 staff will be on hand to essentially act as a check on those cost estimates to make sure that they are as up to date and accurate as they possibly can be. To that end, we've also updated our requirement in the policy that the cost estimate needs to be prepared within the last 365 days. This gives it a certain amount of currency and validity, and it makes sure that already inflation hasn't taken its toll on the cost estimate. Speaking of that, we have also built in some standard cost estimate contingencies, including an inflation rate, and I'll get to that on the next slide. But every single municipality will be given the same tool, same cost estimate tool to enter in their costs going forward, which should level the playing field and make sure that everybody has access to equally accurate information. We'll also require a scheduling guideline requiring 18 to 24 months between phases of work. We have found in the past that some of the applications that are submitted maybe do not have appropriate distances in the amount of time between the preliminary engineering phase, right-of-way phase, and construction phase. Generally speaking, we've seen that 18 to 24 months is appropriate. There may be some cases on more of a case-by-case basis where we can give some flexibility there, but that will allow us to maintain realistic and more spaced out schedules. Next, we'll incentivize the use of special studies to help set the stage for project development. As you know, as you're aware, we hold a call for projects before the call for projects for special studies or planning studies that can be pursued through the MPO's Unified Planning Work Program, and that is a DA or Surface Transportation Block Grant direct attributable set aside that we put specifically towards planning studies that begin to identify project risks like environmental analyses and feasibility studies that help you develop these good cost estimates and schedules in the first place. And then finally, we will create a central MPO resource hub where you have access to all of the latest and greatest up-to-date information from both the MPO and NCDOT when it comes to developing these schedules. That brings us to developing good project costs. We are going to require that that project cost estimate prepared by the PE or confirmed by NCDOT Division 9 goes into effect, and then we'll also add in a contingency factor. Depending on where your project is in the project development process will dictate how much percentage extra you will have to tack on. That is because if your project is just a line on the map and you're in the planning stage, there's a lot more there's more of a risk that something changes with that project. And so you need to build in a little bit more cushion in your cost estimate. Say you're applying for a project in the right-of-way phase, or maybe it's reached the construction phase. Your contingency will then be, a lot less. We're also applying an inflation rate of 5% per year. So if you are applying for funding in 2028, make sure that that inflation is built in for that. Because a project in 2028 is going to very likely be more expensive than a project now here in 2024. We also built in the NCDOT administrative fee. That is across the board a 10% requirement that applies to all MPOs that go through a very similar process as us. That 5% is a change from the last time we met. It was previously 3%. We increased it to 5% in correspondence with what the State Transportation Improvement Program unit is doing with inflation factors. The second thing we heard was that calls for projects need to be much more predictable, and we need to make the application process clearer for all participants. So what we're going to do is we're going to continue our tradition of having a call held at the beginning of the year, except this time it will be at the beginning of every year. In our even years, you can apply for new projects and existing projects that require supplemental funding. And then in your odd years, we will accept only supplemental requests for funding. One exception to this is transit vehicle replacements. We have a need across the board from our transit agencies to keep up with a state of good repair. So we are allowing those applications to flow into any given year. We'll also use the RFF subcommittee members to amplify this information to their local communities, essentially act as liaisons to you, the TAC, as well as to other folks in their respective municipalities who may be considering an application to these programs. We'll also continue to offer our typical workshops and application meetings. At the end of the day, we want to incentivize delivery of current projects. And so part of what we are doing for the first time is designating an annual opportunity to apply for supplemental funds. This means that we will hold calls for projects that focus only on projects that are currently programmed in the State Transportation Improvement Program, and we know are going to require additional funding to, ultimately reach the ground. We're going to pilot this through a supplemental only call for projects in early 2025 to essentially kick the tires on this. We'll continue to provide technical assistance to municipalities through our RFF subcommittee, and the policy does build in room for a 25% project score boost to be implemented in subsequent years once we see that municipalities have improved their performance. The next piece, and perhaps the biggest, is to prevent overextension of municipalities. Doing so, we are establishing a project cap for all municipalities. This is, in cooperation, or I guess in line with what we have seen other MPOs do. Specifically, the Durham, Chapel Hill, Carrboro MPO has implemented a cap. And so what we are doing is, for our very largest municipality, Winston-Salem, we are setting a cap of about 15 projects. For our mid-sized towns and municipalities, that would be Clemens, Louisville, and Kernersville, we are defining that as 8. And then for our populations, our municipalities with under 10,000, they will be limited to 5 regional flexible funding projects. To balance this out and to also deter folks from continually requesting supplemental funding, any supplemental request for funding beyond number 2 is going to count as an additional tally against your municipality's project cap. And so you may be wondering, where does my municipality currently stand in this? Currently, every single municipality in our MPO is under the project cap, except for City of Winston-Salem, which has, I believe, 19 regional flexible funding or locally administered projects currently active. So this is essentially to set into motion wanting to get those projects delivered first. And then once you reach your cap or are under your cap, you can begin applying for funding again for new projects. That does go in line with what I was just saying: discourage excessive requests for supplemental funding. I mentioned the 3 strikes rule, but we've also built in, you'll see in the extensive policy, higher scores for projects that are requesting less above their original budget, less often, and more, and have higher on-time performance. We ultimately want to discourage excessive requests for supplemental funding and keep our projects on time. Here's a listing of our RFF subcommittee nominees, who I named in the item a little bit earlier, as well as a list of liaisons. And then really quickly, I want to provide a recap of what has changed since this was presented as an information item. We've gone from 3% inflation up to 5% to build in a little bit more cushion. We're offering an alternative to the PE cost estimate requirement. We are building in 2-year renewable terms for the Regional Flexible Funding Subcommittee members. We added additional liaisons to incorporate more modes of transportation, and also let FHWA in on some of the coordination here. And then we've built in some minor clarifications for transit and procurement projects and updated transit criteria overall. With that, I would like to provide some next steps. Our RFF subcommittee will be launching in September. We're going to start to roll out the applications and tools that will support this program and hopefully make it a great success. And then pilot early 2025 supplemental calls for projects. And this will be a living document. There's, probably some things that will need some tweaks after a year or 2. Policies are always changing, and we want this, our RFF subcommittee, to have a little bit of flexibility to change with the times. Finally, I'd like to acknowledge the hard work of a lot of folks on the technical coordinating committee specifically, who worked on the Regional Flexible Funding Work Group to help make this happen. direct consultation with peer MPOs like the Charlotte Regional Transportation Planning Organization. They left comments on our policy, and you'll see that our policy is highly similar to what they currently have. We also sampled fairly heavily from the Durham Chapel Hill Carborough MPO, bits and pieces from the Capital Area MPO over in Raleigh and the Fayetteville MPO as well. So we did not do this alone. We had a lot of help, and happy to answer any questions on this one now.
Very good. Hunter, take a breath. All righty. Ms. Adams.
Yes, Hunter and the whole team, thank you again for everything that you do. Thank you for hearing some of us over the past, 14 years, that we have to simplify the language so that all the people that at the table can understand, and also provide resources and assistance when they can't afford some of the things that's needed. I think we're going to see some great projects come through, and even on behalf of Winston-Salem, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Mr. Hutchins.
Yes, thanks for the presentation. Are there any considerations for shared resources with maybe the municipalities that are close enough that projects could be incorporated with each other?
That's a great question. I believe it would count. So if we're talking simply as against the project cap, we would count a project that is split between Kernersville and Walkertown, for example, as a shared project, unless there was a lead project participant on there. So if Kernersville was picking up the slack or the whole bill for it, they would be the project managers for that. So that's how we would assign how that project is handled. I'm not sure if that answers your question directly.
I guess I'm thinking about if like you said, there's shared resources, would they be split 50-50, or as you said, the lead agency would be the one to share the lion's share of it?
I would
And then
think
the other side,
if I may help
is that-
answer the question, I would think that would be up to the jurisdiction to decide how they want to split the resources. The MPO would not necessarily have any involvement. You would decide who wants to give the match and how much of the match you want to contribute to, and come to an agreement and let the MPO know.
okay, would that affect the match at all?
It would still be the overall cost of the project will be the overall cost of the project. So if it's $1 million, it's 20% of the $1 million. It's the
Okay,
same. So if you
fine.
want to do 10% each, that's fine.
Okay, yeah, I know the lines are starting to blur in some of those areas since the growth's there. So yeah, okay, great, thank you.
Anyone else? Thank you, Mr. Hutchins. I think that's a great question, because more and more we're seeing our municipalities collaborate on projects that benefit each other. And so that's a really, really great question. Thank you for asking that. Any other questions for Hunter?
Mr. Chair, I move
I'm
for
excited.
approval.
Ms. Adams makes the monumental motion.
Second.
I believe it was Mr. Hutchins makes the second. Any further discussion? Kelly, would you please call the roll?
Mr. Robert Clark?
Yes.
Ms. Adam voted yes. Mr. Larson?
Yes.
Mr. Bessie?
Yes.
Mr. Brennan?
Yes.
Mr. Rocket?
Yes.
Mr. Taylor?
Yes.
Mr. Apple?
Yes.
Mr. Horn?
Absolutely.
Mr. Lane?
Yes.
Mr. Marion? Mr. Hutchins voted yes. Mr. Todd?
Yes.
Mr. Morris?
Yes.
Mr. Perkins?
Yes.
And Mr. Willie Clark?
Yes.
That concludes it.
Members, that's unanimous. Again, I just want to footnote this, the implications of what you all just approved, I think, are going to make substantial improvements in how our projects are funded, how they move through the equity and opportunity by all of our municipalities to be able to participate, the additions that a number of you made through the TCC, to be sure that smaller municipalities had resources available to them. I'll say again, Mr. Clark, you've been around as long as I have, Mr. Robert Clark, on TAC. I think this is probably one of the most substantial pieces of work. Mr. Bessie, you have too. Probably one of the most substantial pieces of work that we've done as as a committee, and I really want to congratulate the staff. Hunter, you were the lead dog on this, not to be confused with Ruff, but you were the lead dog on this, and you did a
Thank you.
great job. And I know you had a terrific support staff, but you can go home tonight, put your head on your pillow, and know that you've accomplished something very meaningful today.
Thank you so much.
Very good. You now get another opportunity, and this time you do get to participate with Mr. Ivy on our next item.
That's correct. The item in front of you is consideration of the Prioritization 7.0 Regional Impact Project Local Input Point Assignments for the Winston-Salem Urban Area MPO. As part of the biennial update to the State Transportation Improvement Program, or STIP, we are required to go through a process known as Prioritization 7.0. This process establishes a data-driven and local input-based process for evaluating, scoring, and ultimately programming projects across the state in the 2026 through 2035 STIP. Prioritization proceeds in 3 different categories: statewide mobility, regional impact, and division needs. We are currently closing out the regional impact project point assignment period, which for us includes regionally significant highway and rail projects. At the regional impact stage, the Winston-Salem Urban Area MPO has up to 2,400 points that it may assign to projects in this category, and recommends that these points be allocated across 27 projects as indicated in the attached table. This recommendation was made available for public review for 30 days, and during that time, 350 or more written comments and 1,400 likes and dislikes were given on our interactive public comment map. So with that, I'd like to proceed into our informational presentation, and after my presentation will be some slides from Mr. Pat Ivy at Division 9 to explain in a little bit more detail what the financial picture is looking like for prioritization this year. So Mr. Chair, with your permission, I'd like to share my screen once more.
Fabulous.
And we are back on screen number 2. And we're here to discuss our regional impact project point assignment need to know information for prioritization 7.0. As I stated, as MPOs, we are required by the Strategic Transportation Investments Law to participate in this process that we know as prioritization. And it starts with us at our level submitting projects based mostly from our Metropolitan Transportation Plan and submitting those projects and getting them approved by the TAC. So you'll probably recall that last year in July of 2023, we approved a really long list of projects. From there, we submitted that to Spot Online. The state crunched the numbers, did a lot of data review and backup data checking to ultimately come up with quantitative scores for each of these projects. That led to them announcing the statewide mobility project. So statewide mobility projects are projects like I-40 widenings, US 52 interstate types of projects, and the Northern Beltway are projects that are examples of projects that are eligible for statewide mobility funding, which is 40% of the overall financial picture. When the scores were released in late May and 100% of the scores are based on a data-driven process, none of the projects in the Winston-Salem Urban Area MPO had been picked. But the good news is that each of these projects also cascade to be eligible for selection in the regional impact point assignment process, which is why we're here today. And that is 30% of all available funds, and selection is based partially 70% on that NCDOT quantitative score that I mentioned, but also 30% on local input, half of which comes from our MPO. So we're really deciding 15% of a score here when we're allocating our points. That's something important to keep in mind. Thought I would start with a little bit of context and picture as to what we're really up against as an MPO and as a region. Winston-Salem MPO is just one of many MPOs in Region D, and our region is composed of Greensboro, Chapel Hill, Burlington, High Point, and Rowan County. 195 projects are competing for funding, for regional impact funding, in the amount of about $14.4 billion. However, we're only 35 of those, and only $458 million is available across all of the entire region. So all of the communities that I mentioned there. So already some very stiff competition. The role of the MPO in this is to assign local input points. And I stated earlier that we have been given up to 2,400. We're really given a base allotment of 1,900, and we've opted to flex. And I'll talk about a little bit why in a moment. But really, we decide how to assign points in accordance with the methodology. And you'll recall that the TAC adopted the methodology back in March of 2024. We did it based on factors of safety, congestion, environmental justice, freight, and project readiness, but we also considered your input as Transportation Advisory Committee members, or perhaps Technical Coordinating Committee staff who submitted votes on your behalf. So each of your votes counts as 40 points towards a project. Once we crunched the numbers, we were able to calculate a top 19 projects. We ran this list past NCDOT Division 9 to see if they're also putting their points towards those projects to make sure that they were in the best position possible. So let's cut through the noise on the table that we're asking you to adopt here and really get straight to the point. One of the most important numbers is this green column right here. The higher the number out of 70 that you have in your regional impact project score, the better, because that's going to give you a really strong start to potentially getting your project funded. These columns that you see here, the draft MPO criteria rank, the MPO quantitative score, MPO qualitative score, and the total MPO score, these are all part of that local input point assignment evaluation that I talked about earlier, and those 40 points that each of our elected officials here in the TAC had the opportunity to direct projects towards dictates that final score. So you'll see that there are a few projects, especially on this first page, that received multiple votes from multiple TAC members, so they exceed what would ordinarily be a 40-point threshold for qualitative scores. That was a way that those TAC members essentially helped solidify those projects to be guaranteed for the next thing, which is the most important thing, actual points from the MPO, or 15% of the final score. So if your project has been granted 100 local input points, it's actually been given a 15-point boost because of our share of the points. So again, to clarify, the MPO score does not equal the number of points that the MPO is giving to a project. It does not equal the final project score that's decided by NCDOT in cooperation with the MPOs and the divisions. But the MPO score is a tool for determining which projects should receive points. Higher MPO scores are more likely to receive local input points, and that's what matters most. And if you receive local input points, your project is in a better position, but not guaranteed, to receive funding. So again, I mentioned we have a pool of 1,900 points. We have decided to flex that up to 2,400 points. Generally speaking, if we're putting points towards a project, we're putting the full 100 points to the project. One exception to that rule may be a project that spans multiple MPOs. An example of this may be a rail project that spans all the way down to Charlotte. Only 23% of that project, for example, is in our MPO, so the maximum amount of points that we can give to a project like that is only 23. So if you see, less points, less than 100 points given to a project, it is likely because it is in a different MPO as well. So again, that's the breakdown of how a score is done: 70 from NCDOT, 15 from us, and 15 from Division 9. I think a lot of you are probably wondering, what is it going to take this year when you have $14.4 billion worth of requests and only 458 million? It's probably going to require a score of 80 points or better. So if you've scored 50 points in that NCDOT quantitative score category or column, you're in great shape, or at least in more competitive shape. And certainly, though, you do need the allocation of MPO and division points. So we're flexing points because ultimately Region D has available funding and Division 9, the division needs level, unfortunately does not. So we are maxing out our flex. We have 500 points that we can take from the division needs point assignment bucket, and we're putting all of it into Region D because that's where we have a chance to actually program funds. Again, the recommendation: flex 500 points from division needs, raise our pool to 2,400 points, donate 47 points to the Greensboro Urban Area MPO in support of our top scoring rail project. Per the policy, we always allocate 100 points towards the top project in each mode, and then we assign the remaining 2,353 points. This is another visual of how we went through and ranked. The top scoring projects in each mode get 100 points. That required a donation to Greensboro, and they accepted that donation, we're happy to announce. And then we went through our MPO criteria, and until our pool of 1,900 points ran out, we stopped there. All of those projects got the full 100 points or their geographic share if they're split between High Point or maybe Greensboro. We then assigned the maximum geographic share to R230509 due to a really high degree of public support for the Winston-Salem to Charlotte passenger rail project. And then finally, we assigned full points to the last remaining projects with the highest NCDOT quantitative scores, because you'll recall those are the projects that are best positioned to potentially get funded through the process. So that's how we applied our policy. We really did not have to deviate much from what we did, but that is our documentation there. And I wanted to close with just a few slides before I turn things over to Mr. Ivy to talk about the financial picture in a little more detail about our public participation for this. It was somewhat by accident, but a group, Best of Winston, picked this up, and they saw that passenger rail was one of the items under consideration for funding through the regional impact point assignment process. And they advertised that we were having a public meeting. We also had a great deal of help from our fellow municipalities here in the MPO: Clemens, Rural Hall, Kernersville, and Winston-Salem. And this ultimately resulted in 81 public meeting participants, 3 media interviews to promote the event as it was happening, and 300 plus written public comments, and 1,400 interactions with our interactive map. If you scan the QR code there, you can see a record of all of the comments that we received. We received comments from all over, from a wide swath of folks, and including wide swath of generations. I'd like to call your attention to this very cute public comment in support of passenger rail from Raleigh to Winston from a child who had submitted that. So it's really great to see all folks participating in this. Just to give you a glimpse at public participation, this doesn't completely accurately depict how public participation played out, because we had a lot of public participation from 27006 in Bermuda Run. They just did not provide their input typically through a survey that requested the zip code. So this zip code data does only account for our meeting, our online surveys, and map comments that chose to tag their comment with a zip code. Generally speaking, you're seeing what I think the MPO has historically seen: a lot of participation on maybe the western sides, but still some work to do in the north and the east portions of the MPO. I want to provide a quick summary of where the project stood. This is only one way to look at the overall feedback that we got. We got feedback from email, in-person survey, online surveys, and interactive maps. And all of them in somewhat different formats, right? So even though we tried to collect information about specific spot IDs, maybe some folks were specifically writing just for one, whereas if they came to the meeting, maybe they took the time to go through all of them. We made every effort to make sure that our counts that we present here are pretty accurate. Overall, what you can see in the 090605 category, those are your I-40 widenings, fairly divided crowd on that, but lower comments relative to what you'll see from some of the other topics. H090546 is a widening in Bermuda Run that adds bike lanes and sidewalks to both sides. A lot of support for that. You'll find that a recurring theme in this was support for projects that incorporate multimodal elements. And then the H090076 projects you see here at the bottom of the screen, that indicates generally pretty wide support for finishing the Western Beltway, but certainly a few opposition comments to be noted. On this page, I want to call your attention to H184620. This is our top ranked project using MPO criteria. This received 121 comments in support and 39 comments in opposition. Most of these comments came by way of email. Thank you to Mayor Brannon for helping get the word out on that particular project, and definitely see the impact of that. H15249 is the Jonestown Road interchange. Pretty broad support for that project as well. But really, the end of the day, the big stories were rail. The reason the folks came out to the meeting was to support these projects, and you can see that here in this graph. And then finally, wanted to close, Village of Clemens had a really concerted public comment effort, really focusing on their one project in the regional impact And most of these comments came through our interactive map, but broad support for the road diet and partial widening that includes bike lanes and sidewalks around Tanglewood there. So we'll see you next time. We have to do this process again, unfortunately, with less funding available in the division needs bucket. But we hope that this presentation gave you a solid understanding of how we allocated points and why we did it the way we did. And with that, I'd like to stop my share of this particular presentation and turn things over to Mr. Pat Ivy.
Your Honor, just a footnote, prioritization is where projects go to die. But I'm hoping that we'll have a couple of projects emerge from our division that actually get funded. And Mayor Brandon, you did contact your 100 friends and ask them to submit. So thank you for doing that.
You're welcome.
Mr. Ivy.
Good afternoon, Mayor and members of the TAC. It's good to be here this afternoon. Hunter is going to run the presentation for me, and he mentioned during his time the available funding that we have in both the regional impact and division needs category. And I want to go into just a little bit more detail and how DOT arrived at that number and be able to answer any questions that you all might have. So diving right into it, the funding availability for P7.0 is basically 4 primary components, as you see here. First of all is the initial allocation that we get, which is based on the latest consensus revenue forecast, and that includes both state and federal funds. From that, we deduct an amount that we reserved for inflation. As we mentioned before, and Hunter covered as well, we are using a 5% inflation factor compounded annually for years 1 through 5 in the 10-year program, and then from there we use a flat $500 million per year for years 6 through 10. And again, that was approved by the Board of Transportation, and I commend the MPO for piggybacking on that and providing some consistency in their local projects as well. So I think that will bode well for us. And the good thing is that we look at this every 2 years and can make adjustments, as I'm sure the board will do in years to come if that should change based on realistic inflation costs at that time. Beyond that, I wanted to spend just a moment on the variance adjustment and just want to make sure that you understood exactly what that was. We also call that in DOT the look back law. And quite simply, that is a comparison of the funds that are budgeted in the TIP versus funds that are authorized for projects in each STI funding category. And we've done that since the implementation of STI in 2016. Very quickly and very simply, we look at the calculation of the past state and federal year, again, looking at the budgeted amount in the TIP versus what was actually authorized during that same time period. And the annual difference between those two numbers is what is considered the variance adjustment. Let me give you a very simplistic example. If during that calendar or fiscal year, the TIP is budgeted at $100 million and the actual allocations or authorizations in that same period is $150 million, then the difference, the $50 million difference is what we consider the variance calculation. And that $50 million actually has to be reduced from the available amount of funding that we have in the next version of the TIP. Nobody loses anything because that amount is what was actually allotted during that time period, and we just simply take that away from the available amount of funding for the next version. So again, this is something that we've had more questions on and just want to make sure everybody understood where that number came from. And then lastly, we look at the amount committed during the 2026-2035 TIP. We say that because, of course, you know that projects, even though they may be programmed in a specific year, we do program the funding over a number of years, anywhere from 3 to 5 years. And we certainly want to make sure moving forward that we've accounted for the programming of those projects that are funded over multiple years when we look at the next version of the TIP. This is for all projects in the TIP, except those non-committed and unfunded projects. And you see the list here that we're talking about there. So all that is how we arrive at that $458 million on the regional impact and the negative 15 on the division needs. So the next slide will actually look at the regional impact funding you see here. And I'll go through this very quickly. If you look at Region D, our initial allocation was $1.89 billion for the 10-year plan, for the 10-year program. The amount reserved for inflation is $247 million, and that's backed away from that $1.99 billion. The variance adjustment that I just described is $171 million. But probably the most important part is the amount of funds that are committed for committed projects is just over $1 billion there. All said, that is where we get the $458 million in available funding for the next version of the TIP. It is important for everybody to understand that that number is as of May when these numbers were put out. We are looking at continue to get new cost estimates, and if they do increase, the $458 million will decrease in terms of available funding. So just want to make sure everybody understands that. Any questions before I move on to the division needs category? Okay, next
quickly,
slide. Yes.
Pat, real quick, how can you allocate more than what's budgeted?
Very good question. And I actually meant to go over that and completely slipped my mind. So the TIP, of course, has a project budget in the TIP. Very, very rarely when we award a project is the amount that was of the low bid, does it equal the amount that's budgeted? And the same thing for right-of-way, the right-of-way phase and the preliminary engineering phase. So a very simplistic example, if you've got a project that has a $50 million budget in the TIP and the low bid was $52 million, then that is an example of over authorizations. Does that help?
Thank you. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, okay. So let's look at the division needs category, which of course is the most flexible category that we have and the one that most of us are most interested in. You see here, every division has that initial allocation of $807 million. Every division has the same amount that's deducted for inflation at $105 million. On the positive side, Division 9, if you look at the variance adjustment, we actually had less authorization than we have budget. So we have a positive of $78 million that's actually added back into the program. Now, unfortunately, we have $795 million that's actually that is taken out or backed out of the amount because of committed projects they will have. And the unfortunate part of that is the end result is we are $15 million over programmed in the division needs category. Now, I will say we certainly don't want to be that way, but I'm surprised that we were able to limit it at $15 million. You do see that there are some divisions that have availability in the division needs category. There are also a couple of divisions that have over $100 million in a deficit that they've got to make up, just like Division 9 has to make up the $15 million. And I will have a slide momentarily of how we're going to arrive at that figure. So any questions before I move on to talking about the cost increases? Next slide.
Pat,
Yes,
Pat,
go ahead.
could you just briefly tell the meeting attendees what the division numbers are, particularly for the larger urban centers, such as if you could start at number 8?
I will. Very quickly, like Division 7, which is Greensboro, they have a balance of 184 million that they have available for programming. Division 8 down in Ashboro has a balance of 113 million that they have available. On the other side, Division 5, which is Raleigh, the Raleigh-Durham area, has a deficit of 107 million, as does Division 10, which is Charlotte. They have a deficit of $108 million. And then, of course, a couple of others, the Wilmington area, they have a $54 million deficit. And Division 2, which is the Greenville area, they are at a deficit of 85 million. Does that answer your question? Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Okay, next slide. We've talked a lot about cost increases since we came back from COVID. Obviously, cost increases or cost estimates are an issue for us, or have been since COVID. The inflation factor has really wreaked havoc with our budgets, but we have really made some significant strides in trying to get a hold of those so that they are no longer as big of a problem as they have been the last 2 or 3 years. You see here, NCDOT, we've continually updated our cost estimates to make sure that no estimate is over 2 years old. We recently updated the estimates for all of our statewide mobility projects and updated our estimates for our regional impact projects as well. We will be going through the same exercise for all of our division needs project late summer and early fall as we prepare for the submittal of those projects in September as well. Now, to more accurately reflect anticipated costs, NCDOT did refine the per mile cost for preliminary estimates using actual bid data from recently awarded projects. And this does help because it results in, when we don't do that, it results in significant cost increases. And the largest increases are where detailed quantities are not yet known. Let me say again, on both the regional impact and division needs, it is certainly possible that additional cost estimates or cost increases could change those numbers, but we're hoping to keep that at a minimum. Next slide. This is probably one of the more important slides that I want to focus on. We said that we do have some capacity on the regional impact level. So let's focus on the division needs category, because the question here is, if a STI funding category is over programmed or in the negative, what happens? As you all know, in our division needs category, we are $15 million over program. Number one, there will be no new projects funded from P7 in that division needs category, because we have to make up that $15 million deficit. Currently, all non-committed projects in the TIP, which basically is the last 5 years in the current version of the TIP, will become unfunded projects. Now, those unfunded projects are still being evaluated under P7.0. Some committed projects in years 1 through 5 of the committed program may be delayed to help make up that deficit of 15 million. There are some divisions that have a larger deficit, may result in some of those committed projects becoming decommitted. We are hopeful, because that $15 million is relatively small when you look at the overall impact. We are hopeful that we can address that deficit purely by schedule modifications. In other words, delaying some of those committed projects so that we don't have to actually decommit some of the projects, as some divisions will have to do. We will know that later this year, but our goal globally in the department is to minimize the number of committed projects that will become unfunded. But again, we're hopeful in Division 9 because that number is relatively small, that we can manage that overage with just scheduled delays. We are back in June. Our programming office provided staff with information on how we will determine project delays and/or decommitted projects in each of the divisions and regions. And we'll be working directly with the MPO and, of course, the TAC as well to prioritize these projects so that we will use that prioritization provided by the division and by the MPOs in determining where those delays and or decommitments may have to take place. So we have a deadline of August to get that information back to the programming office. So I'm sure our August meeting we will talk about that and getting those priorities before the deadline of August 30th. So that is where we are. And again, the reason for that quick turnaround is because September 23rd is the date where division needs local input points assignments are required. So we needed to get this done before then. Many of you may ask, why are we even going through this process on the division needs side if we are not going to have any new projects? Well, quite simply, some divisions do have capacity and they've got to go through this process. So obviously every division is going to go through it across the state. But probably more importantly, there is always a possibility that there could be some unforeseen funding sources, either on the state or the federal side, that comes available that we're not looking for right now. If that should happen, we need to have a process in place that we can go down that list to utilize those funds should we be so fortunate that we get them. That actually has occurred in the past, both on the state and the federal side. So we want to be prepared for that should it happen. So that is my presentation. I'm available to answer any questions you might have.
Thank you, Pat, for that cheery news. Do we have any questions for Pat? Members, and let me just say this. Thank you. We're going to run a little long today, so thank you all for sticking with us. Pat, one quick question. We did not have a scheduled meeting for August. Is there any way that you can get that revised list out to us when you all make your deadline and make that determination?
I'll let Hunter and Kelly address that.
I'm assuming that we have
Hi,
odds
Mayor
or
Horn. Can you
Yeah.
repeat the question, please?
Yeah, Pat mentioned that they needed to have their reevaluation of projects that were going to be non-committed or funding removed. And he has to, Pat, I think you said your deadline was the middle of August.
Yes, Mayor, and this is simply for the prioritization of our existing projects that will be used for that. That's what the deadline is for.
At that particular point, you won't know what projects may have funding pulled or decommitted.
That is correct. Not at that time.
Good. Well, then I withdraw my question because we can wait till September to find that out, get that good news. All righty. Any questions for Pat? Thank you, Pat. Thank you, Hunter, for that presentation.
Mr. Chairman,
we
I'd
do
like,
have-
I'd like to just thank Pat as we did Hunter for the great way that they boiled this down and made it understandable even by those of us with lesser experience than many of us. And you did a great job in communicating it to us, and thank you both as well.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, you guys make the big bucks, right, Pat?
Yes, sir.
Very good. And thank you, Mr. Apple. I appreciate that comment a lot. So, members, we do have item 6, which is the consideration of our prioritization 7.0. Since we have no more questions, we'll entertain a motion, please.
Motion, Brandon.
Second.
Made the motion. Who made the second, please?
Bradley.
Okay, Bradley Taylor, thank you. We have a motion and a second. Any discussion? Kelly, if you call the roll, please.
Mr. Robert Clark,
Yes.
Ms. Adams,
Yes.
Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Bessie,
Yes.
Mr. Brandon voted yes, Mr. Rocket,
Yes.
Mr. Taylor voted yes, Mr. Apple,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Marion, Mr. Hutchins,
Yes.
Mr. Todd,
Yes.
Mr. Morris,
Yes.
Mr. Perkins,
Yes.
and Mr. Mr. Willie Clark.
Yes.
That concludes
Thank you, members. That is unanimous. Our final item for action is item number 7, which we've moved up, as we mentioned earlier in the agenda. John, I'm sure you have a very abbreviated presentation for us on that.
Yes, I do, Chairman Horn. Thank you very much. On page 144 starts action item 7. It is a resolution for a letter of support for the Life Center of Davidson County, which is applying for a 5310 grant through NCDOT. This grant funding being applied for is for $99,000 with a local share match of $9,900. Section 5310 program provides funding to improve mobility for seniors and individuals with disabilities by removing barriers and expanding options for transportation services. Should this be approved, the attached letter of support will be included in their application. For additional information, I was provided ridership numbers from July of 2023 to May of 2024. There was a total number of 2,419 total rides, which averages 220 per month, from a low of 180 rides in November to a high of 251 in April of 2024. Be glad to entertain questions.
Any questions for John? This again is our request for a letter of support. If not, we'll entertain a motion, please.
Move for approval, Adams.
Second, Clark.
Ms. Adams makes the motion. Mr. Robert Clark makes a second. Any discussion? Kelly, if you call the roll, please.
Mr. Clark voted yes, Ms. Adams voted yes, Mr. Larson,
Yes.
Mr. Bessie,
Yes.
Mr. Brandon,
Yes.
Mr. Rocket,
Yes.
Mr. Taylor,
Yes.
Mr. Apple,
Yes.
Mr. Horn,
Yes.
Mr. Lane,
Yes.
Mr. Hutchins,
Yes.
Mr. Todd,
Mayor Todd stepped out of the room but voted yes.
Mr. Morris, Mr. Morris,
Yes. Yes.
Mr. Perkins,
Yes.
and Mr. Willie Clark.
Yes.
Members, that's unanimous. Kelly, give me the urgency of items 8, 9, and 10.
The only item that requires your attention is item 10, as we have a guest from the airport wishing to make a presentation to the board.
Very good. So members, if it's okay with you, we'll skip items 8 and 9 and move right on to Mr. Davidson. As you know, I see no objections, people falling out of their seats in disapproval, so we'll move on.
So I'm on, Mayor?
You're on.
Okay, so I'll make this really quick. I presented earlier to the TCC. It was about 5 minutes. Go to the next slide. We're doing a lot of things at Smith Reynolds Airport, and this past year, we had a surprise project that we have to do because the FAA advised that we're no longer grandfathered in on our runway object-free area, and so we are going to have to invest in a new fuel farm. And so the county commissioners, Forsyth County, has approved a lease extension with Signature Flight Support, and they're going to invest $5 million in relocating a fuel farm. But just real quick, the runway safety area is about 1,000 feet off the end of the runway and 250 feet from the center line. And then there's a runway object-free area that's about 400 feet from the center line. That's that purple area beyond the red area. And so you can't have any fuel trucks parked there, any fuel farm or aircraft parked in that area. So if you'll go to the next slide, there's a number of things to keep our certification so we can handle commercial service aircraft as well as the United and American that come in for maintenance, repair, and overhaul. That we're going to have none of those fixed assets in the runway object free area. We're going to move the taxi lane kilo to the northern section of the ramp. We're going to relocate that fuel farm, like I said, and Signature is going to invest $5 million in that. And then we documented in our certification manual. So we still have our certification with the FAA, and so we're moving forward with a lot of other projects. But I just wanted to update the MPO that there's going to be more investment out at Smith Reynolds Airport. So if you don't mind going to the next slide. So in addition to that, we have some current projects. I mentioned earlier, we're not spending as much as Pat Ivy, but we are spending about $150,000 a day on a couple projects, and one of them is a terminal renovation. You can sort of see here, the building was built in 1941, and so we are stepping up to renovate the building. This will be the new front door to the community. Signature Flight Support is going to lease space in the terminal as well as other tenants, and this is where majority of the traffic will come through the terminal now that has not been used like that. So our fixed base operator will meet aircraft here. If you want to go to the next couple of slides that show pictures, that's the canopies. We'll have a couple of covered areas for when passengers arrive. Weather, we'll have a deck on the backside. You'll be able to look over the airfield. This is looking from the air side into the terminal. There'll be the back like 1941 with the big glass opening. You'll be able to see in the terminal. A lot of natural light will be in the terminal. You can go to the next slide. Here's a couple pictures I took a couple months ago. You can sort of see some of the terminal the renovations going on. This next slide shows the main mixing box or the main lobby. So one of the cool features of this the terminal renovation, you go to the next slide, is going to be an aircraft. Oh, I'm sorry. That's the future conference room. You can see that fireplace in the back. It was covered with drywall, and we uncovered it, and we're still going to use that. Mantle was in pristine condition. It's kind of funny when we removed the drywall that they even had where the logs were sitting, and pretty amazing discoveries when we started renovating this terminal. The next slide is the one I think, I don't know if you know, Z. Smith Reynolds flew an aircraft in 1931, Savoia Marchetti from Britain to China. And so if you go to the next slide, we're going to have that aircraft, the same make and model, hanging from the ceiling in the main lobby area. There's another slide here that it shows from you'll be able to look over the observation area into the cockpit. And so that'll be a neat feature. And so that's going to be done. We're looking at February. Hopefully all the construction will be done, and we'll have a ribbon cutting, invite everybody out. Another project that we're spending a lot of funds on is a 66-day project, and we just finished a couple of phases. Sharp Brothers was a winning construction firm. The county commissioners approved that contract. And so we're talking about 23,000 tons of asphalt out on the runway or the taxiway. If you go to the next slide, it sort of shows you our main primary runway 1533, which can handle the 737s. There's a parallel taxiway, and that's the one that's been in bad shape for 14 plus years. And we finally, the state stepped up and provided a 90% grant with state aid from the NCDOT Division of Aviation. So we did all the connectors already. The taxiway's back open. We have to do some permanent markings a little bit later. We did what we call Oscar and Papa taxiways that go down to the Maisie S. Woodruff Aviation Lab. And then on the far left, you'll see a little bit of yellow. We're removing an old taxiway. So that'll be the last couple of phases here. So that project will be done here in August. If you go to the next slide, another project, and you'll see with these projects, they're all different types of funding. We, like I mentioned before, state aid. We've issued limited obligation bonds the county has, and I'm paying the debt on that out of airport funds. Another source of funding we got is an 80% grant from the EDA. And this will help the infrastructure at North State Aviation, that facility that was built by Piedmont Airlines back in 1969. So we're investing in that facility to keep jobs here in Winston-Salem. Next slide. Another project, we have Avis Budget Group, and we want to keep our rental cars as well as keep county and school vehicles clean. So we're building a car wash to retain that business and help the county fleet vehicles out. So we're doing that project. That's about 1.3 million. If you want to go to the next slide. Some other planned projects. Since the FAA wasn't able to step up with the taxiway alpha, they are issuing a grant to us around 4 million, and we're going to replace at 90% with a 10% local match. We're going to replace about 525 lights and 114 signs on the airfield that are outdated. Our whole taxiway alpha is actually not working, and we have reflectors out there. So this is a much needed project, and so we're going to be moving forward with that. Design's about 90%. Done, so that should be early next year. If you'll go to the next slide. Another project, when I was talking about different funding, that airfield lighting project is actually what they call FAA discretionary funds. So it's based on safety, and so we rated high for that. This project is actually going back to what you all just talked about, STI. This was done in prioritizations a couple years back, and so we've had a environmental assessment that was approved by the FAA, finding no significant impact. And so now we're working on getting our 401 and 404 permits so we can build this 242,000 square foot apron, a ramp with state funding 100%. And then we're gonna, go to the next slide if you would. We're gonna put a maintenance, repair, and overhaul hangar adjacent to that ramp. And if you go to the next slide, give you an idea. We got some state capital infrastructure funds that's already in our bank account, earning interest, and we just need to get through the EA, get the permitting, and then we'll get started on the ramp as well as the MRO hangar development. To give you an idea, go to the next slide. If we can get 3 lines of business, 737, that's about 75 jobs per aircraft. So we're talking about a lot of job creation out the airport, and that's one of our market niches is maintenance, repair, and overhaul. You want to go to the next slide? Some of the other projects really quickly, security access, we're going to be using that SCIF funding. We got 23 million a couple of years ago, and so we're going to use it on the MRO hangar. We used a portion of it on corporate hangars, the terminal building, a portion of it. And we're also going to spend some money on security access. In the next slide, some long-term projects. We're using invisibility, a landfill assessment is another project that we're using those SCIF funds on. But some long-term projects we're looking at. South Ramp, the county already owns the existing land down by the Foresight Tech Aviation Lab, the Maisie S. Woodruff Aviation Lab, and so we're looking at different developments down there possibly. Go to the next slide. Some other future ones is possibly an access road or site development on the far side of the airport. This is the county owns a lot of land on that side of the airport, but there's a lot of environmental concerns. You got the Brushy Fork Creek, which the city was so helpful, and also the NC Land and Water Fund with $300,000 from each of those entities to help with the Brushy Fork Creek. But there's an old landfill on that side of the building or that side of the facility, the airport, and so just a lot of things to consider before we even go to the county or the city for any sort of zoning change. But we need to figure out what we can possibly do with that land that's compatible with the neighbors. We understand that we'd have to have and need to and want to have several meetings with the neighbors to make sure everybody is understanding what's going on and what could possibly be a compatible land use. One of the things I think it really is the electric vertical takeoff aircraft. They're very quiet, and that might be something that could be built on that side of the field. You go to the next slide. The reason I bring up the neighbors so much is because on that side of the field, we are a downtown airport. We're not like Greensboro. We don't have all that land, and we realize that we need to be good neighbors. So the area in purple is actually zoned residential. That gives you an idea. Some of that residential zoning goes all the way up to the edge of the runway. So there could be some development outside of that purple on what's already zoned GI. But if we want to do any development in the zoning, we'd have to have the zoning changed by the city council, and we would need to work closely with council member Burke and all the other city council members. So that is a long, term project here in my estimation. We have a lot of issues that we need to work through and before we would take anything from the direction of the county commissioners. So you want to go to the next slide? And I think I'm done, and I tried to get it quickly in here. There's just another aerial view of the airport and all the residential neighborhoods that surround it. Oh, I forgot. I got just 2 more slides. This just shows some conceptual development on that side for those electric vertical takeoff, but we were able to do that. Go to the next slide. The purple's Brushy Fork Creek. You can see we can still have some cushion with some trees and some development of hangars, and possibly, you know, some sort of noise wall between each hangar if you're ever going to do any sort of development over there. So that's just some site considerations, developments, but nothing firm. And that's it. So I know everybody's probably getting hungry for dinner, but I'll entertain any questions, or you can call me or email me after this meeting. I'm open 24/7.
Thank you, Mark. Members, any questions? Mark, when did you say your renovations were going to be complete?
I'm crossing my fingers for February, mid-February. Yeah.
Okay, well, maybe if we can work it out, the logistics, our crack logistics team on the MPO, maybe you would host us for a meeting out there.
That'd be great.
I think all of us love airplanes and airports, and we'd love to come out and see the progress that you're making. I know it's a great resource for our community.
I made a joke a little earlier about it seems like the focus is on rail lately, but yeah, PDO, the future is aviation too. Don't forget us. So, but we've been very blessed with the STI points, the prioritization, and we'll just continue to put in projects and hopefully get it picked.
Good. Thank you, Mark. Appreciate you being with us today. Members, do we have anything else that we need to? I am going to just assume that we want to dispense the staff reports this afternoon. Staff members, anything that must come to our attention? Committee members, any comments you'd like to make?
A very
Very
informative meeting. Very informative meeting.
Our next meeting is September 19th, and it is a virtual meeting. Is that right, Kelly?
Yes, sir.
Okay, I see heads nodding. Very good. So we'll see you there. You're off the month of August. I hope everybody has a good dog days of summer as we begin to head back toward the fall. Once again, members, thank you so much for staying with us today. The work that we do oftentimes goes unnoticed and certainly unappreciated, but what you all accomplished today and what staff presented to us that we were able to approve today is going to be remembered, I think, by a lot of folks who are engaged in the transportation business as a milestone day for what we've done for our projects and our communities. With that, if there are no other comments to be made, we'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
Move for adjournment.
Renewal Adams makes the nomination. Mr. Taylor makes the second. Any discussion? Do we have to do the roll call, Kelly?
Nope.
We do not.
No, good. All those in favor, just for the sake of it, say aye.
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 Yeah, opposed. Thank you, folks. We'll see you in September.
Thank you, Chairman.
There's a song like that, isn't there?